Today I'm going to be talking about how I, as a coach and athlete, think about training zones and intensities. I've noticed that a lot of coaches and athletes use a lot of different terms and definitions to describe training intensity. And with that, having a conversation about training can be a little difficult since we're speaking essentially two different languages. And so there can be a lot of miscommunication there. So today, I just want to clarify how I think about and talk about training zones. This isn't to say that my way is the only way of doing things. I just want to better explain so that athletes or anyone who reads my articles better understands what I am talking about. I'm going to start by acknowledging that there are many more qualified exercise physiologists and coaches who've talked endlessly about this topic. And if you want to learn more about training zones and intensities from a scientific source, check out Dr. Steven Seiler's YouTube channel or check out Dr. Philip Skiba's book, Scientific Training for Endurance Athletes. Both Seiler's and Skiba's work have heavily influenced my knowledge of training zones. However, with learning so much from them and kind of combining it, I've kind of made my own unique zones, and it's kind of influenced how I think and talk about training zones. And so not everything I'm going to say is going to completely coincide with one particular model. So when talking about contemporary zone models, we're typically talking about the three-zone model, which is currently being used by most exercise physiologists and savvy coaches alike. Considering the three-zone model serves as the foundation for how I like to think about training intensity, I figure giving a quick summary of this model is a good place to start. The basic concept here is training intensities are divided up by your lactate thresholds, LT1 and LT2. I'm going to generalize some things for time's sake, but one basic thing you need to know to understand this model is that as metabolic rate increases, lactate production increases as well. While lactate itself does not cause muscle failure, its appearance in the blood is correlated with aerobic exercise failure or termination. So in the three-zone model, zone 1, Z1, includes anything underneath your LT1. Below LT1, your metabolic rate is low enough that your muscles are able to buffer lactate and utilize it as fuel. So you don't really see much lactate showing up in the bloodstream, hence the low blood lactate levels. This is considered easy training, and the purpose of training in this zone is to just improve your aerobic base. Once you move above LT1, you enter zone 2 or Z2. In this zone, your muscles are no longer able to keep up with lactate production, so it begins to leak out into the bloodstream. However, lactate levels in this zone are buffered by other organs in the body, like the liver, heart, and the brain. And so this zone is considered moderate training, and the purpose of this zone is to improve your lactate thresholds and lactate buffering systems. Above LT2, your body is no longer able to keep up with lactate production, and blood lactate levels will exponentially increase. This is zone 3 on a three-zone model. This zone is considered hard training, aka see the face of God zone. And the purpose of this zone is to maximize your body's ability to put out power aerobically, which basically means raise your VO2 max, which serves as the ceiling for this model. Now, I understand why this model is popular these days. It's directly tied to measurable physiological markers. However, I think there's some key shortcomings to using this model, and so I've made my own additions. Number one problem I have with this model is VO2 max is not your power output ceiling. Anyone who's gotten their VO2 max tested knows that their speed at VO2 max, or VVO2, is slower than their max speed. Why is this? Well, whenever we are measuring your ventilatory system via heart rate monitor or even VO2, we're only measuring your aerobic system. That makes sense. We're just measuring breath rate. But we're missing measuring your anaerobic system or your lack of oxygen system with these measurements. Now, for endurance athletes, the anaerobic system isn't the most important thing, but we can't ignore something that's very much there. On the other side of the spectrum, we also aren't given much context on where the three-zone model starts, since the lower end of Z1 isn't defined. This is actually a hot topic amongst athletes. A lot of people ask me, well, how slow is too slow? Well, basically, the three-zone model doesn't define how easy is too easy. And the line here is pretty murky, but I think we need to define what is the bare minimum effort level needed to elicit a significant fitness or aerobic adaptation and acknowledge that there is a zone below Z1. I think we can all agree like sleeping or sitting on the couch isn't going to be aerobic training. So saying like Z1 is just the lowest level isn't entirely true. My last qualm with this model is how broad Z1 is. Now, I'm going to be honest, for this one, my opinion here is more based off of a hunch and gut feeling rather than direct scientific evidence. Anecdotally, I and other experienced athletes I've worked with can perceive a difference between the low end and high end of Z1. What causes the shift in perceived effort level and what justifies me making an extra zone to account for it? I'm not really sure, but I theorize it has something to do with a shift in ratios of lipid metabolism to more carbohydrate metabolism as your body's main fuel source. This zone is basically the physiological equivalent of the Bermuda Triangle. We don't really know what's going on here, but something's afoot. Regardless of if you buy into my conspiracies, most research and coaches suggest we shouldn't be spending all our time easy training running at the upper end of Z1, so I think it's important to give some definition of what that upper end is. So while I think the three-zone model is awesome and probably more scientifically sound, I use a six-zone model. So right now, I'm just going to run you through all the zones that I use. At the very top of my model is your anaerobic power zone, which includes any intensity above your VO2 max. Its ceiling is your max power output you can generate, basically as hard as you can go. I denote it as Z plus because it is a zone that's outside of your aerobic system. And unlike all your other zones, which means we can't use a heart rate or respiratory rate to gauge this effort. Think of this intensity as a speed in which your muscles will max out before your aerobic system does. While not the most important metabolic zone to train for endurance sports, we can get some great neuromotor and muscular training in this zone, which will help to improve speed across all the lower zones. An example of a workout in this zone would be hill strides. All right, next up we have my aerobic power zone, which includes anything above LT2 or critical velocity and up to your VO2 max. In terms of effort, this includes anything between your 10K effort, which is about your critical velocity, up to your 1 mile effort, which is about your VVO2 max. In terms, this effort is where your aerobic system reaches its limits and maxes out. Think of this as your aerobic ceiling. In this zone, breath rate should be very high and you shouldn't really be able to talk much. We train in this zone because the higher VO2 max is, the more room we have to raise the other zones below. Basically, all these different levels are just going to be percentages of your VO2 max / aerobic ceiling. An example workout in this zone would be 5 by 3 minutes at 5K effort. In between LT1 and LT2 sits your tempo zone. In terms of effort, it includes anything in between your half to full marathon effort, depending on your abilities as an athlete, all the way up to about your 10K effort. Like Z2 in the 3-zone model, this is where your body maximizes its ability to buffer lactate with the goal of improving your speed endurance. At this effort level, your breath rate will be high, but you should still be able to get 2 to 3 words out if pressed. An example of a tempo workout would be 20 minutes at 1 hour effort. Next up, we have my moderate zone. Now the definitions are going to get a bit tricky. In terms of effort, this zone includes anything between your half and full marathon effort all the way down to about your 50K effort in advanced athletes. Main goal here is to improve your aerobic threshold and your muscular endurance. At this effort level, your breath rate will be higher than easy pace, but you should be able to say 1 to 2 sentences occasionally. An example of a moderate workout would be 14 miles, easy mod, 4 miles easy, 1 hour moderate, easy cool down to hit mileage. Then we have Z1, or your purely easy zone. In terms of effort, we're looking for anything below your 50K effort, but above a jog or a brisk walk. It's almost impossible to run too slow to receive the aerobic benefits we're targeting here, so as long as you run at a speed or hike at a speed equivalent to an effort level you would use to jog on flat ground, you should be good. I like to use the talk test to determine your effort level here. You should be able to hold a conversation at this effort, but you shouldn't be going so easy that it would be easy to sing a song. All right, then at the bottom here, we have your zone 0, or your recovery zone. So we get a little bit of solid ground here since we can define the bottom of this zone as your resting metabolic rate, which if you go past, bad things happen. And then at the top would be a brisk walk on level ground. It's widely debated how important this zone is to aerobic adaptation, and I've already been way too controversial today to give definitive opinions on this at the moment. Right now, it's deemed by the American College of Sports Medicine that basically in order to shift into Z1, you have to be at 55% of your max heart rate, but they kind of pick that arbitrarily. Basically, they said that there is enough research to say as long as you're above 55%, you should be getting enough stimulus to get aerobic training. There are some studies that say below this you can still get help, but definitely above this you're good. But even with that, I'll say no matter what, this is an important zone to consider. Adaptation occurs during periods of rest, not during periods of activity. So this is a zone that's going to allow you to adapt to everything we just talked about. So likewise, we can treat this as a zone that we're trying to stay in during periods of rest. And what I mean by that is there's this concept of recovery runs, where on a quote-unquote rest day, you're going for an easy run in order to recover. Well, that's still training. That's still in the easy zone. So we want to stay in zone 0 on our easy days or during periods of recovery. An example of a recovery workout would be like a chill walk or a bike. So there are all my zones. Even if this isn't the most concrete way to think about training, I hope you find these zones as useful for gauging, writing, and thinking about training as much as I do. In future articles, I'll be doing a deeper dive on each zone I use, and we'll discuss when to put zones in training, the exact physiological adaptations created by them, and how to structure specific workouts for each zone. So until then, I hope you enjoyed this video and happy running.